Good morning. Would you please take your seats? We are about to start the meeting. Your Excellency Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Republic of Brazil, Your Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa, Your Excellency Philemon Yang, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency António Guterres, Secretary-General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Subramanian Jaishankar, Minister of External Relations of India, Your Excellencies, Ministers of G20, invited countries, members and permanent observers of the United Nations, heads of invited international organizations, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the second G20 Foreign Meeting Ministers of the Brazilian presidency of the group. Brazil is This is a very special occasion for us as the G20 assembles for the first time at the United Nations in a meeting open to all UN members. Without any further ado, let us begin our opening session. I have the honor to ask His Excellency António Guterres, Secretary-General of the United Nations, to deliver his remarks. Please, Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, all protocol observed, agradeço ao Presidente Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
Your Excellencies, with all the protocols observed, I'd like to thank President Lula and the Brazilian government to co-organize this meeting of the different foreign affairs ministers from G20 and all UN member states and financial international organizations.
The G20, the United Nations system, and the Bretton Woods institutions and other international financial institutions deal with some of the most important challenges of our time: inequality, financing for development, the climate crisis, the impact of new technologies. In all these areas, progress is slipping out of reach as our world becomes more unsustainable, unequal, and unpredictable. Conflicts are raging. The climate crisis is accelerating. Inequalities are growing. And new technologies have unprecedented potential for good and bad. Global institutions must work together, not on parallel or conflicting tracks. They must cooperate and collaborate for the good of humanity, and the Summit of the Future was an essential first step. It has created opportunities and possibilities for reform across the board, but without implementation, it will be meaningless. The work starts today. Excellencies, the Pact for the Future is about action in the here and now, and G20 countries can act in three specific areas. First, finance. We need ambitious reforms of the international financial architecture to make it fully representative of today's global economy, so it can provide strong support to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. I commend the leadership of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund for making important progress, but the resources available are still dwarfed by the size of the needs. Many developing countries are being hit by a double whammy of climate chaos and debt. To support low and middle-income developing countries effectively, multilateral development banks must be bigger, bolder, and better. And we need a far more robust financial safety net to shield countries in a world of frequent shocks. Voting rights and decision-making rules should reflect the changing global landscape. And access to concessional finance should be based on needs and vulnerabilities, not just on income. All parts of the global financial system must work together to reduce the cost of finance and the inequalities that blight our world. This demands action on debt, starting with an effective mechanism to deal with the debt relief and restructuring. As a first step, I welcome the commitment by the International Monetary Fund to review the debt architecture as set out in the Pact for the Future. I look to all G20 countries to push for deep reforms so that global financial institutions reflect today's world and respond to today's challenges. And one of those challenges is global hunger. It is shameful that in our world of plenty, around 1 person in 10 regularly goes without food for an entire day or more, known as severe food insecurity. I welcome President Lula and Brazil's focus on global hunger during the G20 presidency and call on all G20 countries and all UN member states to strengthen efforts to end this affront to our common humanity. Excellencies, the second area for action is climate. We are at a critical moment, a battle to prevent temperatures from rising above the agreed limit of 1.5 degrees. Today's decisions and actions will determine the course of our world for decades to come. The climate crisis transcends borders and politics. Climate action cannot be a victim of geopolitical competition. Under G20 leadership, we will be able to have drastic reductions in fossil fuel production and consumption as an essential element for climate action. By 2030, global production and consumption of all fossil fuels must decline by at least 30%, and global renewables capacity must triple. This requires OECD countries to phase out coal by 2030 and to fully decarbonize power generation systems by 2035. And it means non-OECD countries to phase out coal by 2040. I've been strongly advocating for no new coal or upstream oil and gas projects for all G20 nations. New national climate plans due next year are an opportunity for countries to align energy strategies and development priorities with climate ambition, taking into account the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. They must also show how each country intends to transition away from fossil fuels in line with the outcome at COP28. Excellencies, there has never been a greater global challenge than the climate crisis, and there has never been more agreement on the solution, a just transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And renewable technologies have never been better or cheaper. The obstacle to the renewables revolution is not economics or lack of solutions. It is mindsets and lack of vision. Those that lead the renewables revolution are already reaping the rewards. But many developing countries are being left behind. Clean energy investments in emerging and developing economies outside China and India have barely increased since 2015. The energy transition must be based on justice and equity so that all countries benefit. Excellencies, third, we need strong, inclusive, legitimate global institutions and tools to tackle the challenges of today and tomorrow. Fair and representative governance is a first step to unlock broader reforms. The Pact of the Future includes commitments to make multilateral institutions more representative, effective, transparent and accountable. I urge the strong engagement of G20 countries, including in reforms of our United Nations bodies. Making the Security Council truly representative by addressing the underrepresentation of Africa, Asia-Pacific, Latin America and Caribbean. Stressing the role of the General Assembly and the Peacebuilding Commission and enhancing the Economic and Social Council. The same principle applies to the international financial architecture. It should correspond to today's global economy with much stronger representation of developing countries. For our part, the United Nations is totally committed to strengthening our convening role as an inclusive platform for dialogue and action. And as part of that role, from next year, we intend to host biannual summits to formalize a dialogue between the UN system, the G20, and international financial institutions. Excellencies, only together will we achieve the reforms in the Pact for the Future and deliver the SDGs and the Paris Agreement to meet the expectation of the people we serve. I urge the G20 to seize every opportunity to raise ambition for global leadership and transformative action for a safer, more peaceful and sustainable work for all, and I thank you.
I thank the Secretary-General of the United Nations for his remarks, and I now call upon His Excellency Philemon Yang, President of the General Assembly, to deliver his speech. Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, the G20 remains a critical platform for addressing global economic challenges, fostering international cooperation, and driving sustainable development. Under Brazil's presidency, we have seen a renewed focus on inclusive growth, social equity, and environmental sustainability, priorities that resonate with both emerging and developed economies. Brazil's leadership has provided stability and vision at this critical time, guiding meaningful dialogue and collective action on the global stage. Excellencies, we convene at a critical moment when the world is uniting around the urgent need to revitalize our multilateral architecture, ensuring it is fit for addressing today's challenging problems. In this spirit, during the recently concluded Summit of the Future, we adopted the Pact for the Future, which outlined a comprehensive path forward for collective action. I call on the G20 to take decisive steps in advancing the outcomes of that summit, particularly in reforming the international financial architecture to make it more equitable and effective for all nations. G20 countries representing approximately 60% of the global population and contributing around 85% of the world's GDP, bear the responsibility of leading the charge in realizing the ambitious goals set out in the Pact of the Future. Excellencies, I appreciate Brazil's initiative to convene this G20 meeting open to all UN member states. It reflects Brazil's commitment to reinvigorating international cooperation and reforming global governance institutions. I also wish to recognize the leadership of the previous G20 presidencies from the Global South, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and India in representing and advancing the interests of developing nations. This is a testament to the rising influence of the Global South in shaping global priorities. The efforts have laid the groundwork for continued progress on global equity and inclusivity. As we look to the future, I express my optimism for South Africa's upcoming G20 presidency. With South Africa and the African continent as a whole taking the lead, we have a vital opportunity to continue this momentum and ensure the voices of the Global South are central to global decision-making. As a son of Africa, I am eager to see South Africa's leadership in 2025 advance the interests of the Global South, particularly in sustainable development, debt relief, climate action, and concessional financing, among other pressing areas. I look forward to supporting the outcomes of your discussions today and wish you all a very successful meeting. Thank you.
I thank the President of the General Assembly for his remarks, and I now call upon His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa, to deliver his speech. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President of the General Assembly, Ambassador Philemon Yang, Secretary-General of the UN, António Guterres, President of the Republic of Brazil, Luis Lula da Silva, Your Excellencies, Foreign Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to start off by appreciating the role that Brazil has played in convening this meeting as the current president of the G20. We further commend the excellent manner in which Brazil has been steering the work of the G20 during its presidency, continuing to hold tens and hundreds of meetings to ensure that the G20 meeting is held properly later this year as the summit of the leaders. It has been an auspicious start to the 79th session of the UN General Assembly. We convened the Summit of the Future, at the end of which the Pact for the Future was adopted. The Pact is a blueprint in many ways for a sustainable, just and peaceful global order for all the peoples and all nations. In your address, Secretary General, to the General Assembly yesterday, you highlighted the fragilities and fray at the seams of our global order, a world of impunity, of inequality, and of deep uncertainty. We concur with your sentiment that the challenges our world faces may be daunting, but they are not insurmountable. Our meeting today reaffirms our conviction that as we strive to overcome these challenges, the United Nations must remain a centerpiece of multilateralism. At the same time, it must be modernized to make it fit for purpose and more effective, more agile, and more forward-looking. The UN needs to be inclusive. It needs to represent current geopolitical relations and the prevailing international realities. The G20's call to action on global governance reform that will be adopted today at the Foreign Ministers' meeting is therefore timely and also necessary. South Africa is committed to the reinvigoration of the multilateral system and the reform of the global governance institutions to make them more representative. It is not without significance that the countries of current Troika are all from the Global South. The reform of the global financial architecture in particular must be the rising tide that lifts the fortunes of the most needy and vulnerable in the world. Deepening inequality and chronic underdevelopment are the cost if we fail to act now. The quest for mutual, shared and equitable prosperity necessitates that we undertake bold and decisive reforms to create a stable and inclusive international financial architecture. And these reforms are urgently needed to broaden and also to strengthen the participation of developing economies in the international economic decision-making system. South Africa is concerned about the slow progress that is being made in reforming the multilateral trading system. While the WTO Ministerial Council has registered some progress, much work remains to be done to ensure global trade is development-focused and sensitive to the climate change imperatives that the world faces. South Africa assumes the G20 presidency from the 1st of December 2024 to November 2025. This is approximately 5 days before the deadline to the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The next 5 presidents of the G20 will have to focus their efforts on accelerating progress towards the attainment of the SDGs. At the launch of the special edition of the Sustainable Development Goals Progress Report on the 25th April 2023, the Secretary-General drew attention to the gravity of the situation. Just 12% of the SDG targets are on track. Progress on 50% is weak and insufficient. On more than 30% of the SDGs, we have stalled or gone into reverse. If we are to meet the 2030 deadline, a paradigm shift is necessary. South Africa has adopted as the theme for the G20 presidency solidarity, equality, and sustainable development. We aim to mobilize countries of the world towards taking practical steps that will resolve global challenges while strengthening international cooperation within a rules-based system. In an interconnected world, the challenges faced by one nation affect inevitably all nations. Through solidarity, we seek to advance a unified and mutual support among nation members. By advancing equality, we seek to ensure fair treatment, opportunities and advancement for all individuals and nations. This must be irrespective of their economic status, their gender, their race, their geographic location, or other characteristics. Sustainable development is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The pace of mobilizing the necessary resources to ensure that countries with developing economies meet the SDGs does not just have to be accelerated, it has indeed to be turbocharged. South Africa's G20 presidency will place Africa's developmental priorities at the top of its agenda. A prosperous, developed, and stable Africa is a central pillar of our foreign policy. In this, we are guided by the priorities contained in the African Union's Agenda 2063 that talks about the Africa that we want. We will work in close collaboration with the African Union, which has now been admitted as a member of the G20. South Africa's G20 presidency provides us with a great opportunity to advocate for and mobilize support for developing economies of Africa, but also of the Global South. In doing so, we will build on the efforts and successes of the Indonesian, Indian, and Saudi Arabian and Brazilian G20 presidencies. With less than 6 years to go before 2030 for the attainment of the UN agenda for the sustainable development, we are at a crucial inflection point in humanity's history. As the G20, we have an important role to play in fulfilling the aspirations of the UN Charter for social progress and for better standards of life and for larger freedom for the peoples of the world. In this regard, the UN Charter highlights the employment of international machinery for the promotion of economic and social development for all people. By strengthening and reforming multilateral mechanisms and institutions, by deepening economic cooperation, we can indeed realize a better world free from the twin scourges of inequality and underdevelopment. And I do believe that this is the time for us to achieve all those aspirations that we have set out for ourselves. I thank you.
I thank the President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, for his remarks, and I now have the honor of asking His Excellency Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, to deliver his speech. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Caro companheiro Cyril Ramaphosa,
my dear friend Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa,
meu caro companheiro António Guterres,
my dear
Secretary-General das Nações Unidas,
Secretary-General António Guterres, I also like to greet the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Yang,
meu companheiro
my brothers,
Mauro Vieira,
ministers, my brother
Ministro das Relações Exteriores do Brasil.
Mauro Vieira, who is the Foreign Affairs Minister of Brazil.
Gostaria
I would
de dar as boas-vindas a todos
like to welcome
para esta
everyone
reunião
in this
de
meeting
ministros e
of
ministras das Relações Exteriores do
G20
G20.
foreign
Agradeço a
ministers.
presença do
I'd like to
presidente da
thank
Assembleia Geral,
the presence of
Philemon
the
Yang,
President of the
Secretary-General
General Assembly,
António Guterres.
Mr. Yang, and the
É
Secretary-General
uma
António
satisfação
Guterres for their presence.
ser
It is an
antecedido
honor
pelo
to
presidente
speak
Ramaphosa.
after President
Pela
Ramaphosa.
primeira vez
For the very
na
first
história,
time
os
in
países do
history,
G20
the
se reúnem na
G20
sede da
countries are
ONU
gathered
em
at the
encontro
UN
aberto a
headquarters
todos os
in an
membros
event
da
open to all members of
Essa
the organization.
não foi uma decisão
This was
trivial.
not a trivial decision.
Ela é coerente com nossa profunda
It is
convicção
coherent with our
de que as
core
Nações
belief that the
Unidas
United
são
Nations
e
are
devem
and
continuar
must
sendo
continue to
o
be
coração
the
do
heart of the
sistema multilateral.
multilateral
O
system.
Brasil
Brazil
está trabalhando
is
com
working
afinco
hard
para conseguir
to
avanços
ensure the
concretos na
G20
agenda do
agenda can
G20.
present concrete
No centro das
advancements.
nossas
At the
prioridades
core of our
está a luta
priorities
contra as
is the
desigualdades em
fight
todas as
against
suas formas.
inequality in all
Essa
its
preocupação
forms. This concern
permeia os três eixos que
pervades
guiam
the
nossa
three
presidência.
pillars that guide our
O primeiro
presidency.
é a
The
inclusão
first
social.
is social inclusion.
Em julho último,
In July,
adotamos as bases para a
adopted the
Aliança Global
foundations
contra a
of the
Fome
Global
e a
Alliance
Pobreza,
against Hunger
que
and
já está
Poverty,
aberta a
which is
adesões
now open
e será
for
oficialmente
membership and
lançada
will
em
be
novembro.
officially launched in November.
A Aliança
The Alliance
vai mobilizar
will
recursos
mobilize
técnicos e
technical
financeiros
and financial
para promover
resources
uma
to
cesta de
promote a
políticas
pool
públicas de eficácia
of public
comprovada
policies
contra esses
with
flagelos.
confirmed efficacy
O segundo
against
eixo
these scourges.
é o
The
enfrentamento
second
da
pillar
mudança
is
do
addressing
clima.
climate change.
Como disse o nosso presidente, o G20 é
The G20
responsável por
is responsible for
80% das
80%
emissões globais de
of
gases
all
de efeito
greenhouse
estufa.
emissions, as the
Sua
president
liderança
said.
na missão de conter o aquecimento a 1,5 graus fará a diferença para todo o nosso planeta. O Brasil trouxe para o debate climático atores como os bancos centrais e bancos públicos de desenvolvimento para garantir uma transição justa. Aprovamos o primeiro documento multilateralmente acordado sobre a bioeconomia. O terceiro eixo é a reforma da governança global, foco principal dessa reunião. Como disse ontem no meu discurso de abertura da Assembleia Geral, a comunidade internacional está correndo em círculos. Não conseguimos responder aos desafios globais porque trocamos o multilateralismo por ações unilaterais ou arranjos excludentes. Não trabalhamos juntos porque as instituições multilaterais estão desacreditadas. Para romper esse ciclo vicioso, precisamos de coragem para mudar o empenho para superar as diferenças. Nossa capacidade de resposta é prejudicada, em particular, pela falta de representatividade que afeta as organizações internacionais. Se os países ricos querem o apoio do mundo em desenvolvimento para o enfrentamento das múltiplas crises do nosso tempo, o Sul Global precisa estar plenamente representado nos principais fóruns de decisão. Isso requer ao menos 3 eixos de atuação que estão refletidos na chamada ação endossada pelo G20 e que os chanceleres discutirão nesta manhã. O primeiro é eliminar o caráter fortemente regressivo da arquitetura financeira internacional. Países em desenvolvimento enfrentam custos e dificuldades desproporcionais na obtenção de financiamento em comparação com os países ricos. As taxas de juros impostas a países do Sul Global são muito mais altas do que as aplicadas às nações desenvolvidas. O endividamento, que afeta severamente alguns países em desenvolvimento, estrangula o investimento em infraestrutura, bem-estar e sustentabilidade. Em 2022, a diferença entre o valor que o mundo em desenvolvimento pagou a credores externos e o que recebeu foi de 49 bilhões de dólares. Há mais dinheiro saindo do que dinheiro entrando. A taxação de super ricos é uma forma de combater a desigualdade e direcionar recursos a prioridades de desenvolvimento e ação climática. A ONU e seu secretário-geral devem voltar a ocupar posição central no debate sobre questões econômicas e financeiras de relevo global. Quando o FMI e o Banco Mundial foram criados, suas juntas executivas tinham 12 assentos para um universo de 44 países. Atualmente, são 25 assentos para mais de 190 países. Se mantida a proporção original, estas juntas deveriam ter hoje pelo menos 52 cadeiras. Esta lógica excludente se reproduz em várias instâncias. Nos fundos verdes, países florestais e megadiversos são obrigados a dividir assentos enquanto os países ricos ocupam cadeiras exclusivas. O segundo eixo é o de repensar o sistema comercial internacional. Ninguém se lembra mais da rodada de Doha. Hoje a OMC encontra-se paralisada devido a interesses geopolíticos e econômicos. Reverter o novo impulso ao protecionismo, que prejudica desproporcionalmente os países em desenvolvimento, é essencial para garantir um comércio mais equitativo. Essas mudanças terão impacto limitado sem reformas efetivas. O terceiro é o de promover uma ampla reforma. No momento de sua fundação em 1945, os países membros optaram pela colaboração ao invés da fragmentação. Isso demandou enorme vontade política e muita sabedoria. Hoje, nos deparamos com uma escolha semelhante. 51 países fundaram a ONU. Atualmente, somos 193 membros. O Brasil mantém firme sua posição histórica. A ONU deve estar sempre no centro da governança global. A organização passa por uma crise de confiança que precisa ser restabelecida. O Pacto para o Futuro representa um passo importante nessa direção, mas não podemos nos furtar de transformações estruturais. A Assembleia Geral é a instância mais democrática da ONU. Nela, cada Estado, independentemente do tamanho da sua população e economia, tem sua voz assegurada. Precisamos fortalecer também outros órgãos, como o Conselho Econômico e Social. A ECOSOC deve ocupar a dianteira da promoção do desenvolvimento sustentável. Ele deve cumprir um papel mais ativo no monitoramento das metas da Agenda 2030 e além dos compromissos climáticos. Na sua atual configuração, o Conselho de Segurança tem se mostrado incapaz de resolver conflitos e menos ainda de prevenir. Falta transparência no seu funcionamento. Falta coerência nas suas decisões. Milhões de pessoas sofrem as consequências. Milhões de pessoas sofrem as consequências dessa ineficácia. Com mais representatividade, em especial da África e América Latina e Caribe, teremos mais chance de superar a polarização que paralisa o ONU. Por isso, o Brasil considera apresentar proposta de convocação de uma conferência de revisão da Carta da ONU com base no seu artigo 109. Cada país pode ter sua visão quanto ao modelo de reforma da governança global ideal. Mas precisamos todos concordar quanto ao fato de que a reforma é fundamental e urgente. Queridas companheiras e companheiros, criticar sem agir é um exercício estéril que termina em desalento. Mas admitir que há fissuras a serem reparadas é o primeiro passo para construir algo melhor. Cada dia que passamos com uma estrutura internacional arcaica e excludente é um dia perdido para solucionar as graves crises que assolam a humanidade. Tenho certeza de que todos aqui estão comprometidos com o futuro das Nações Unidas e trabalharão com dedicação em prol de um mundo justo e de um planeta sustentável, como diz o lema da nossa presidência do G20. Podem contar com o Brasil para promover um multilateralismo renovado e revigorado. Desejo a todos vocês uma boa reunião. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much.
I thank President Lula for his remarks. Excellencies and gentlemen, we have concluded the opening segment of our meeting. I would like to ask you to remain in your seats as President Lula, President Ramaphosa, the President of the General Assembly, and the Secretary-General of the United Nations leave us to attend other engagements, and we reshuffle our podium to start our ministerial segment. We will resume right away. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, President. Well,